Nigeria's upstream oil regulator has set a bold target to significantly increase oil and condensate production by the year 2026. The plan aims to reach an annual output of 2.6 million barrels per day within the next 3 years, marking a substantial leap from the current levels of around 1.6 million barrels per day. Also, the country's gas industry is poised for a pivotal year in 2024, growing awareness of its environmental benefits coupled with government initiatives to promote its use in power generation, industries, and even households could see demand skyrocket. However, domestic challenges and the global energy landscape present huge risks and impediments to whatever plan or projection the government has outlined for the year 2024. From Surrey, United Kingdom, Chukwuemeka Osuji, partner Olaniwa Ajayi LP joins me to unpack this. Happy New Year to you, Osuji. It's nice to have you around.
Good morning and Happy New Year to you and all the viewers.
Now, Nigeria's upstream oil regulator, according to reports, has set a bold target, and it wants to significantly increase the oil and condensate production by the year 2026. Now, the plan is to actually increase oil production to about 2.6 million barrels per day within the next 3 years. So the question is that achievable?
Thank you very much. Well, speaking personally, I think it's achievable. And one good thing for us, and there's a popular saying, he that is down is fear no fall. I think over the last couple of years, we've experienced very low tides. I think we are now poised to start improving. And I think, thankfully, the upstream regulator has set in place a couple of measures to try to actually address some of the key issues that might be affecting our ability to ramp up production. Measures to deal with the insecurity in the upstream in terms of facilities, measures to deal with the increased cost of production, cost per barrel, they're looking at it. Another thing they're also looking at also measures to deal with, for example, investment costs. So there are policies and initiatives that are targeted specifically at reducing signature bonuses that are paid by people who acquire upstream assets. And in addition to that, of course, you're aware of the upstream, the offshore bid rounds, which of course we are hoping to be concluded in 2024. So I think if some of these measures are diligently implemented, I think we will begin then to see a ramp up in production levels, both for crude oil and gas in the coming year.
So you're saying that it is achievable, but then a few concerns have been raised about Nigeria's ability to achieve the numbers. Now, if you would recall, 2 or 3 consultancies tasked by OPEC Plus last year to verify Nigeria's output said the country was unlikely to reach its target this year due to years of declining output and what currently obtains in the oil field. So what do you think we should hold on to right now in terms of the findings by the consultancies and you and other stakeholders saying that it can be achieved in terms of production optimization?
Okay, I'll try to be a bit granular about this. And for those of us who understand the workings, particularly of the upstream sector, there are green fields and there are brown fields. Of course, if you want to increase production, what you're doing is to try to increase production from the existing brown fields, and then at the same time, you want to start a couple of infield projects. Now, the brown fields are easy to get to the market because all you perhaps need to do are well re-entry programs, a couple of production activities, and then in a couple of months, you will gradually begin to ramp up production. But for the green fields, they do take a couple of months to come on stream. So yes, and the good thing about targets, which I must mention, you must always have a target, even if you fall short of the target. But to the extent to which you are working towards the target and you are incrementally getting to your target, I think for me it's progress. So even if we do not actually hit the exact number that the government has put on the table, and of course we've had the reports, as you mentioned, from a couple of these agencies, but nonetheless, to the extent to which we can ramp up production from the existing brown fields, and then we can kickstart a couple of green fields, I think we'll be on the path to that journey. We might not get to that target in 2024, we might get to it in 2025 or even 2026. But as long as there's progress, one foot after the other, I think it will be a good thing for the upstream sector.
But one thing that would affect ramping up production in these fields, one of them has to do with the issue of crude theft, pipeline vandalism in the Niger Delta, and insufficient investment in the industry that seems unabating. And we know that the Nigerian government has done what it can in the last few years in terms of contractual agreements with security agents in those communities to protect its facilities, and of course different incentives for, of course, when you look at the international oil companies, and of course for these communities and all. But we discovered that these efforts by government have not really yielded much. So won't these persistent problems further constitute a setback for government's lofty plans in the new year for this sector?
There was an interesting thing you said. You said the government has done what it can, and we've seen the results appear to be modest. I think that they've not done what they can. They have done something, but they can continue to do more things. And it's really about being creative. We now understand that that operating environment is a constrained operating environment, and insecurity will continue to live with us. So we have to creatively think of measures to abate that insecurity. So, for example, if you notice, for example, that certain upstream assets, evacuation pipelines or export pipelines are continuously being targeted, if you set up in-country either small topping plants, refinery plants, or gas processing plants, so that you can quickly utilize those products upstream, it will not totally eliminate, but it will abate or reduce those levels of vandalism. So that's why I said, yes, government has done a couple of things, but we need to continue working towards this. And what we need to do is to continue being creative. As the criminals keep adapting how they operate, the government must continuously adapt how it also operates, because this is an ongoing battle for us. We can never totally eliminate it. But I think it's the ability to continue to be creative, while we cannot get ahead of those crimes, but at the moment, to find a way to abate them is what we need to do. And I've mentioned it's not just about having the security architecture in place, which we need to continue to have in place, but it's also more importantly allowing having more creative solutions in terms of operations. If we can have those creative solutions in terms of operations, they will combine with increased security architecture, help to reduce the incidence of this vandalism. So I think more can be done, but we need to keep at it. We need to keep at it. We cannot relent.
So I'm quite concerned when you said that we cannot totally eliminate these attacks on oil facilities in the country. Is that what obtains in other climes, in other countries where oil is being produced? Do we have issues like that, and they have not also been able to tame those form of attacks and nip it in the bud by the perpetrators?
Well, it's important to bear in mind that as for most developing economies or undeveloped economies, security is not just security in itself. It's tied to a couple of other things. It's tied to the economy of the nation. It's tied to the social infrastructure. It's tied to so many other things. And we are at a stage in the developmental trajectory of this country where a good number of people are poor. A good number of people are looking for, in quote, shortcuts to create wealth. A good number of people feel, in quotes, perhaps not justifiably, but disenfranchised. And they are doing the best they can to get a bit of the cake. So it's not really just about the security issue. These other socioeconomic considerations all come to play in the heightened level of insecurity we have in the country, not just in the upstream sector, but in the country generally. And it will take a while for these issues to be addressed. We can't wish them away, and we can't solve them not even in 5 years. So again, as I mentioned, it's a combination of factors. There's the security, there's the adopting innovative solutions. There's also addressing some of these socio-economic issues. The more we empower Nigerians, then the less likely more people will find attractive some of these ventures. So it will take a while for us to eliminate them, speaking, because we are still a developing country, and insecurity is one of the challenges that we will continue to face, particularly in the Niger Delta, given that terrain.
Now, President Bola Tinubu's government said oil majors have committed and pledged to invest about $13.5 billion in the short term into the sector. So what would that mean for the industry, and how are we sure that these investors won't even be discouraged by these incessant attacks and pilferings on oil facilities?
Well, in terms of discouragement, most of these investors have been operating for a good number of years, for some of them decades. They understand that environment. They understand how to operate alongside the locals. They understand how to quantify their losses and to build that into their financial model. So they understand at what points they can operate, at what points they can operate optimally, and at what point they can operate efficiency. And that also drives into the point, there are discussions around the fact that, for example, the cost per barrel producing in Nigeria is more expensive than you get elsewhere. That security cost is one of those key costs because you need to take that into consideration, either adopting rather strenuous security approaches to evacuation and then deploying a significant amount of resources to security. So I do not think that insecurity in itself is enough to stop production. And you must remember that the risk and reward go hand in hand. More often than not, the higher the risk, the higher the rewards. And Nigeria, to be fair, is one key place where, in terms of investments, the rewards are actually quite attractive. So I do not think it will totally hinder. It might discourage a few, but it would not stop those investments. But whether we get the numbers we're looking at is another thing altogether.
Let's talk about the refineries. The Nigerian government scored a first with the Dangote refinery. I think it just received its third batch of crude to be refined. The Warri refinery is set to commence in February this year. That's just next month. But then let's look at the Port Harcourt refinery that should have also started operation. Now, what is your take on the technical completion of the Port Harcourt refinery as stated by government?
I'm an incurable optimist, and I believe any progress is progress. For you to before you get to full completion of technical works and then you have commissioning, and then you said, okay, you've gotten to 100%, you will first get to technical completion. That's at the point where all the bits and pieces, all the parts have been put in place, and then you've cranked the various parts, and you can see that it's working, right? Then gradually you then begin to introduce crude into the systems before you then get to a stage where you can start your commissioning. So technical completion is a good thing. A good number of Nigerians are disappointed at the fact that they were hoping that in 2024 it will be full completion. But for whatever it's worth, technical completion is a good thing. So what we then need to do is look at the timelines from technical completion. When then do we get to full production? Even if the production for that refinery is just 65% that we get to, or even 70, it's not so bad. When you couple that with production that we're expecting from the Dangote refinery and a few other refineries are coming on stream. Thankfully, for those of us who, for example, I worked on the Water Smith refinery project, the first phase. Thankfully, they are moving on to the second phase, and we've seen that progress. And a few other projects are also coming on stream. So I think the refinery sector in the next 2 years is one sector where we'll begin to see increased value. So yes, technical completion is a good thing, albeit delayed, but it's still a good thing.
So at this stage that we are, can Nigeria supply enough crude oil to local refineries, probably to the big private ones, to modular refineries and government-owned? And in that phase, can it also earn enough to actually support expenditure?
In terms of, in terms of whether Nigeria can supply, one thing I know is that the government, and for those of us who are familiar with some of the fixtures in the PIA, what the law has done is to make it attractive for upstream producers to supply to local refineries. And by saying so, the commercials need to work for the upstream producers, even the cost. They can determine the currency in which the payments will be made. And what does that do? We do not want it to be a case where it will be more attractive for you to export. So the government has tried to incentivize channeling these your production to the midstream, and that's a good thing because what it means you then have options. I remember, as I mentioned, a good number of people have evacuation challenges where some of the export pipelines for their crude products are tampered with. Now, with this option, even though it looks like the government is trying to say, I want you to make a commitment to supply to the local market, it's not a bad thing because that means for every upstream producer that is proximate to your refinery, you then have multiple evacuation options. You can either export or you can then send it to the refineries. So I think we will not immediately be able to meet the demands of all the refineries, particularly if Dangote comes on stream. But remember, Dangote will not immediately start producing 650,000 barrels. It will take a while to get to that number. You'll probably maybe start with 200 and then gradually increase as the trains keep coming on stream. So that huge crude requirement is not something we need immediately. It might even take up to 4 years before we get to that. So I think ultimately, yes, while we might not be able to meet all the demands, but at least significantly, particularly if we can ramp up production in the upstream, we'll be able to achieve some of those requirements.
Well, so Chukwuemeka, in all these talks and government plans to increase oil production levels and all whatnot, there's still this ever-growing concern and focus on reducing carbon emissions and equally transiting to renewable energy sources like solar and wind. So with this global shift, looking at it and what the global powers are saying, don't you think that will pose a long-term challenge to oil and gas dominance in Nigeria, Nigeria's energy mix and its pursuit?
Well, two things. First and foremost, I think for most developing countries in Africa, we have accepted the realities. And I think the message is going out to the developed economies. They need to also understand our own realities. We cannot keep up the same pace with the developed economies. So that would happen. Nigeria has identified, for example, natural gas as its key transition fuel. So what that means is that we want to increase production of natural gas compared to crude oil. And in doing so, our carbon footprint will reduce, and significantly so, particularly. There's also the other aspect. When we talk about transition, it's not just about moving to maybe renewables. It's also about more responsible production. For example, investing in carbon capture technologies, for example, and also hydrogen. Hydrogen is one key aspect that is going to drive the energy transition. So I think ultimately we will get there, but not immediately. First and foremost, we need to attract the investments that we need to start production. When the production has started at a sustainable pace, then we can then gradually begin to infuse some of these mixed production approaches that I mentioned, and then that gradual diversification to more renewable-led sector, we can start that. So we are on the path, but for us, it will be a slower path for us. And then again, as I mentioned, but natural gas will be our key champion for our energy transition. And I think if we continue to on this path in the next couple of years, we should be able to reduce what we're seeing in terms of emissions from Nigeria.
Then let's quickly consider the different plans or initiatives of the NUPRC. Now, the Commission said it will set up a framework for crude oil and gas transportation handling costs based on standardized tariff and implement an open access regime for upstream and gas pipelines, including ancillary facilities. So how well will that initiative or with those plans address the bottlenecks that have plagued the sector?
Yes, what the NUPRC is pretty much doing is just to implement what's already in the PIA. The PIA has set out an elaborate framework for midstream, liquid, and gas infrastructure. And one of the key principles of that is really about open access. And what's open access? Really, what's it all about? We do not want every upstream producer to start investing in dedicated infrastructure to either evacuate or transport its product. When there are other people who might have facilities that you could just use. So rather than going through that additional cost, environmental implications, etc., what we want to do is that we need to optimize existing midstream infrastructure. So the open access regime will set out the terms pursuant to which people who need to access some of this existing infrastructure can get their products on this infrastructure. So it's a good thing. The key point to note is that the commercials need to be right. So for example, when the government talks about the tariffs need to make sense. Because if the tariffs do not make sense for the owners and the operators of the infrastructure, then you then run into a challenge. So once the tariffs make sense, then it's absolutely a good thing because you then have a cluster of people using related infrastructure. We lead to cost optimization, and then, as I mentioned, value optimization for those infrastructure. So it's absolutely a fantastic idea.
Then for gas, Chukwuemeka, it is projected that industrial and domestic utilization will soar this year, but then we still have challenges when it comes to epileptic supply inefficiencies in that line and the astronomical rise in price of gas, most especially for companies who make do with it and households. Now, don't you think that would be a major challenge in scaling up the revenue that could be accruable from this particular commodity?
Let me put it this way. From where I stand, I do not think domestic utilization of natural gas we saw this year. It would increase, but it won't soar. Because sorry, suggests there will be a rather dramatic rise in that utilization. No. Natural gas projects, whether you're looking at upstream projects or midstream projects, take time to get to the market. Even for those that are actually on the play, making sure you get the right customers and the right pricing is a key fundamental. Talk less of new projects. New projects takes time. First, you need to deal with the issue of sourcing the natural gas from the upstream. Then you need to deal with the issues of the infrastructure. You need to get it either the transmission infrastructure or the final distribution infrastructure to the end users. So it's unlikely to soar this year. But what we need to see is that consistent discussion again on pricing. And you mentioned pricing. Yes, unfortunately, if the pricing is adjusted to a limit or to an extent that will incentivize the upstream and the midstream producers. It will make gas more available. But unfortunately, the cost has to be passed to somewhere. At the moment, government does not have any more capacity to take on any subsidies. So that means the ultimate consumers need to bear a part of this cost. So what this means is that in the medium to short term, we will see a slight increase in volumes, slight increase in availability, but we are also likely to see increase in prices.
Chukwemeka Suji,
we can't escape it.
Of course. Thank you so much for your contribution on the show this morning. We'll hope that these considerations will be brought to bear by the Nigerian government to see growth in that particular sector. We appreciate your presence.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.